There. Hey. Oh, wait.
Got a commercial to get through.
Oh, darn. Well, it's coming through good on Twitch. We just have an ad.
That's okay. I mean, you kind of have to.
I had too many mics.
I just want to see what
OBS,
happens.
Twitch started pumping my voice through my speakers. I'm like, no,
Ooh.
need to turn those off.
Oh, you'll have that.
Oh, bitrate is terrible.
Terrible. Also, it looks totally like the power supply cable is your microphone right now. That's kind of awesome.
I'll have to move over a little bit.
No, that's perfect, man. Stay right there. Everybody will think that you got an EVGA sweet mic. Oh, that's
Why is
awesome.
bitrate
Oh,
so much
golly.
bad?
Well, I guess we can kick this off. The first
Yeah,
of
we're good.
many. Yeah. So I'm Brad Medlin. He's Chris Touchberry, and we are not your typical IT guys. I'm gonna let Chris tell you a little bit about himself so that everybody kind of understands that. But Chris is a expert when it comes to building computers. That's a fact.
We are unstable. Why is Twitch unstable? Keyframe interval too high. I don't even know what that means.
Somebody too loud?
Keyframe interval too high.
I don't know what that means either. Everything looks fine on the stream.
Login with Twitch authorize. Bitrate seems fine. I don't understand.
I don't see us dropping anything. I'm a few seconds behind, obviously, in the stream.
Well,
What's up?
just all right. Well, if anybody feels that the live stream isn't doing that good, let us know and see what we can do. The bitrate is kind of red. I don't know why. But anyway, I'm Chris. I own a custom PC company called Top Flight Computers. We specialize in workstations and gaming computers and water cooling, and we recently added network storage to our line. But this podcast is primarily about workstations.
It'll be a little bit of everything, I'm sure, Chris. And as I said before, I'm Brad Medlin. I work in the industry, but do an awful lot of IT work for not being an IT guy, which is why we are not your typical IT guys. Um, I come from a background of more than 10 years working in CAD with CAD and with reality capture, laser scanning, drone work, all that kind of stuff. So we're kind of here to bring you a little bit more information about the workstation world and also just work tech in general, because it's kind of been one of the things, work tech has changed so much for us all, I'm sure, recently, as you all can imagine. We want to really just kind of talk about what it is that makes everything function properly. So we're going to kind of be going back and forth about what it is that makes things different between what is a workstation, what makes it unique, why is it different than something else, why is it not really a gaming rig. um, we're also going to talk about other things that are related to this general new tech that's around, AI and just modern background noise suppression that we don't think about, and how beneficial it can be. But as we decide to dive into the topics, we'll also get into some of the news. We do have a YouTube channel up, and this will eventually get there. It is not your typical IT guys.
We'll put a link in
Uh,
chat.
yep, I'll put that in. You want to put that in chat for us?
Yep.
Uh, and we do have an email address that if you guys have questions you want to submit over the week or something like that, I'll put that in there for us. And feel free to send us questions throughout the week. And we plan to do this monthly at first, but we may, if we get enough responses and more people want us to be around, we'll come back more often. Um, all right, so we're not a typical podcast. So there's a lot, there's Linus Tech Tips, there's all the other tech podcasts in the world that you can think of. There are people that love to talk about, leaks, and there are people that love to talk about, new things that are coming that we don't really all know about. Talk about architecture of the actual CPUs. Talk about, everything under the sun. We all can get that somewhere else. We're really more here to kind of focus on the workstation side of things, the IT perspective, I guess, if you want to say, of high-end computing, and also just building workstations that meet your needs. Um, Understanding the differences between things like building a workstation rig that needs to suffice for video editing, and how that's otherworldly different from a CAD rig, and sometimes otherworldly different from reality capture or video rendering, 3D rendering. All of these things come very differently, and as the PC has evolved, I think a lot of people have missed that in the last 5 years with Ryzen and Threadripper, and taking some of the market dominance away from the high end side of things from Intel, but also the Intel Xeon machines that are still staples in a lot of workplaces. A lot of people have missed the what's really new, and what makes these things tick, what makes them different. You see a lot of those other tech tubers talk about overclocking and benchmarks aren't going to be our thing to follow. When we show you something or give you a demonstration or have a guest on to talk with us, we're going to focus on things like, how does it really perform in the real world? It's one of the things that I kind of got to focus around, and recently in my job, is that looking for new components. It's how I even met Chris, looking for new components and how to properly integrate them into our product stack. You kind of had to understand that everything has changed so much, even in the last 2 to 3 years, that you can't just say, hey, this is what we need. And it's not always smart to say, go buy the best of the best. Sometimes that best of the best isn't really what you need. You need something that's in the middle, because you want to build the best workstation, best bang for your buck. Nobody's out here buying Corvettes just to, drive them in traffic. I don't think any of us would do that. So, and Chris has got a lot of experience understanding how things go together and what really makes that work. And that's one of the reasons he and I are doing this together. I would expect in the next coming episodes you'll see a plethora of just pop in conversations we have with people, and we may start doing this where we do the actual chat, and we start doing the podcast in a larger forum where everyone can get involved. Twitch is a great forum right now, and it's a great way for us to get it up there, and then we'll share all the videos to YouTube and compress down the audio so that we can put it into podcast format. So with that being said, I think we're going to try to, and stop me if I'm wrong, but I mean, what other from your perspective, Chris? I know Chris is going to bring a lot to the table. I'm talking an awful lot because I'm used to doing that. I could argue with a fence post, but Chris has a modern take on things that brings the questioning attitude to the workplace. So I'll let Chris add some of his proposals.
Uh, so it really, how the workstations differ is you had gone and touched on it before is really uh it it goes on the software as to what you're doing. Um, like a CAD rig is probably going to be a single GPU, probably, um, more or less the same as like a video editing rig, um, but the CAD rig is probably going to do better with a Quadro because the software is geared towards it. Um, but like a visual effects rig, if you're using a software like Octane, can leverage multiple video cards. Um, so looking at both, say, Ryzen and we're just gonna call it by the chipset. We're gonna look at Ryzen and Z490. Both of those are very similar in that they have virtually the same amount of PCI lanes, um, and the same amount of memory support. So if you're looking for like a two card build, both of those can fit the bill, as can X299 and TRX40, but those cost significantly more. Um, but it's not all about just one software. Um, Oftentimes people are doing multiple different softwares, and you have to see which configuration is going to fit all of them the best. Sometimes uh, you also have to think about which software is the most important. I think we had built a rig, not to I think it was in 2019, where um After Effects was in use, but not a whole lot. And so things that After Effects would have liked more, we didn't focus that much on because it wasn't really a thing. Um, Now, could the system support it? Yes, but um, that wasn't integrated into the build at that point.
So, well, and let's kind of get back to what makes a workstation different blends very easily with what technology is behind a workstation. So you hear a lot of, like you mentioned, about a chipset, comparing Ryzen or X570 to the Z490 chipset and Z590 now. So you kind of get all that information. Um, but the thing that you have to also recognize and realize is that there's a lot of compatible differences between those two. So the big thing being, for instance, when you talk about Z490, Z590, and X570, what you're really talking about is what is available to you to use. So Ryzen, for example, in the Z5 X570 chipset, you're getting a max number of PCI Express 4.0 lanes that's really going to be pared down, difficult to use more than two GPUs. Same thing goes for Z490 or Z590. Those chipsets are different. People tend to think about, they also think about with Intel, they have their C422 and their C621 chipsets that are Xeon based, and really the only difference between that and X299 or anything else is that it's unlocking ECC in the registered DIMM arena, so you can use more memory on that CPU. Um, Typically, workstations have more memory than a standard PC. You know, if you just go and do a quick Google search and run down Newegg and pull up a decent model gaming rig, most of them are going to have 16 or 32 gigs of RAM, and that's plenty for them. And you will find people out there that'll say, well, a gaming rig, a quality gaming rig, is perfect for doing work on. And in some cases, that's okay. But you're not going to find the processing horsepower or frame buffers of a RTX A6000 on a single socket, Ryzen processor. Usually that's not going to be something you see that way, because you're not going to maximize the solution with it. You're also not, like Chris was mentioning, you're also not going to run into a solution with Ryzen or Intel's primary core line, not their X line, but Intel's primary core line. You're not going to run into a lot of multi GPU situations where video rendering on Octane can take huge advantage of that, huge advantage. And so the other thing that you have to think about too is a workstation. You see them; they're typically a lot more expensive to buy, and there's a reason for that. The big reason is most all of these machines go through validation testing on the software that you're going to use. So whether you buy it from Chris or you end up, going and you're an enterprise of 50,000 people buying 50,000 rigs for doing a certain task, and so you go and buy them all from Dell, those machines that you buy, they're going to be spec'd and prepped and prepared to run the software you want and know that you can run that software. And so that quality check and assurance that's going behind the scenes is really what makes a workstation a workstation. It's validated. It's had quality validations to make sure that it's not going to crash when running through something. When you get a driver update for those machines, it's not going to cause your software to all of the sudden crash. So there's some things that will be done differently that you just won't see and won't know, and they're behind the scenes, but that's what makes them more expensive right off the bat, is that they get that extra quality check. And a lot of that goes back to the hardware manufacturers actually doing that too. So if you buy, like I said, buying something from Chris, NVIDIA is doing all of the hardware checks on, an A5000, an A6000, an
A4000.
A4000. They're doing all those checks for you. And so all of that is one of the reasons that contributes to those parts being more expensive.
I'll say that another thing that makes a workstation different than a gaming computer is I think you had mentioned it earlier a bit, is a focus on reliability over raw performance. You know, overclocking something re really crazy and having a whole bunch of water cooling to get an extra 5 to 10% net gain, but it's a little bit more unstable. If that's a toy, i.e., a gaming computer, and it's becomes offline for a week, that's less of an issue because you're not using it to make money. It's sad, yeah, it's unfortunate, but you're not, but it's not like your way of making money and putting food on the table is off. Now, if that's your main workstation and it's, you know, the uh the water pump is dead and you have to wait a week for a new one, that's not good.
Lost money. It all comes back to, is this something you're using? I told myself I wouldn't talk much about crypto to begin with, but I almost have to. It's like a crypto mining rig. If a crypto mining rig goes down because the CPU fails in it and it's got 20 GPUs attached to it, that is money you are not making. You want to be up as much time as possible. Now, to Chris's point, can you do work on X299? Can you do work on regular Threadripper? Can you do work? Absolutely. Prosumer parts are designed to kind of bridge that gap. They're designed to be a workstation and also be a gaming rig that you can use on the weekend. And I guess one of the things that, kind of back to who we are and what why we're here. So perfect examples of this. I have several work rigs that I use, several rigs that I use for work. I use my own desktop for work from time to time. And my own desktop is an X299 platform. I also have a desktop from AMD that's an AMD based Ryzen Threadripper that I use. And I've tested things like Lenovo's P620, which is unbelievably powerful. And it's got, a difference between, it's got a different chipset that makes that same, basically the same silicon, just do things differently. And you can't qualify where some of those things are, but at the same time, when you ramp them up to full power and full prospect, they're doing about the same amount of work as anything else you have. You're going to have them, they're both able to be just as capable, but like Chris was getting at, you're not usually buying a Threadripper to have sitting there at your house running 24/7 at full tilt. I mean, some people do, and that is a great selection and option, but it's just not something that's always done. Um, so another thing, well, and right now the way things are, everything is expensive. It just is. But right now, you also have to think about too. One of the biggest things with like AMD has the Ryzen Pro series that they have, which is basically their normal chips, but with an additional vPro type application like Intel has on some of their chips. What that allows is for virtualization or work from a remote location where you can remote into that chip and do work on it. And remote work is something that has become a staple recently. Not going to always be that way, and we know that, but that change has made some companies go back and rethink their strategy. So they've gone back and said, okay, we're going to have this hybrid approach. We're going to give you a cheap laptop to go home with, and you're going to just remote into your desktop and because we're not going to send you home with a $100,000 workstation. And when I say $100,000 workstation, that's not uncommon in some application spaces. And time is money. So the more you spend into things, sometimes the faster you get them done. And if you've got a lot of, repetitive tasks, you're going to end up with that need for more, to spend a little more up front so that in the back end, you're getting the use case out of it. And so remote work and remoting into those machines from, an AMD's, Ryzen Pro and Threadripper Pro processors, it makes a lot of sense. It adds a lot to the performance too. Usually when you get a Pro Series processor or a Xeon series, if you're Intel or something like that, what you're losing is maybe 50 to 100 megahertz so that you get all those extra tool sets for making remote work possible, or virtualization where you're actually using several different uh, instances of an operating system on the same machine. And so you do have that kind of level of control. Um, so I'm gonna pose this next point to you, Chris, because I think you've probably seen it more from other people. Things have changed. We know that we're doing a lot more remote work. That's just happening. We know that we're doing a lot more. We know things are getting better and people are moving back. And yes, my arm is sore because I got my second shot yesterday. But all that being said, how have things how have you seen things kind of changing on your side? What are people looking for now more? Are they looking more for something that seems like it's like a mixed use rig? Are you because they're at home, or are they looking more for, a power use rig that's just going to sit at the office?
Uh, I think it's a little bit more of the first one. I haven't um I haven't gotten many requests for something that's going to sit at the office and is going to be remoted into. Um, I think that we've been working from home for long enough that most of the back-end infrastructure, the internet connections and the webcams and whatnot are making working from home easier and more possible. Um, Sometimes it's not as easy to put a power rig at home. Um, and and
unless you're
and
mining
then
with it.
right. Um, you have to be ready for the extra heat output. Because any, you know, non-laptop is gonna put out a fair amount of heat, which is gonna make your AC go up more. It's gonna draw more power. Your power bill is gonna go up, etc. Not by like, a lot, but I mean, it's gonna be more load on the grid, so it's gonna pull more watts. Um, but last year we definitely sold more systems for the split, from working in the day and then gaming at night, um, versus something that we ship to an office and then somebody like goes into it.
I I kind of think that that's really what we're seeing more of, anyways. Truthfully, um, I, it's funny, So one of the things that I kind of wanted to, and it's probably a good transition for that, but everyone has a new perspective personally on what they're doing. Are they doing more at home? Are they doing more on the road? Are they doing more in the office? And if you're on the road, you're probably buying a laptop. You're probably not using a desktop, and that's okay. But being on the road, that's a challenge in and of itself. There aren't really a lot of options for high end, work, but you can still find good laptops that will do the trick. Um, AMD and Intel both make decent laptop chips these days, as well as NVIDIA and AMD's GPU chips that go with it. When you think about it, what's kind of the comical normal that we've come to is that everything is very expensive or very difficult to find. Um, and one of the things about it that just kind of makes me laugh a little bit when I think about it is the way PC parts operate and the way they've been sold. And if you've noticed all the shortages that we've seen, it's kind of unique. Um, I definitely did not expect to see GPUs and CPUs out of stock for this long.
Hmm.
Uh, and that, it's not just the funny thing is, I've got to look it up because I wanted to bring it up as a comical point. eBay. Everybody wants to think right now that crypto mining has really taken us to a whole new level of hatred for PC parts, but it's really not that. Um, there are several instances out there. It's a shortage. It's really just a silicon, however you want to say it, or it's not even necessarily just silicon. There's also other shortages in the supply chain for PC parts, and such as the substrate that the PC parts go on, the substrate that makes up the boards, that is holding them back from being able to produce much higher levels. Um, there was, I believe it was a Bloomberg article, but I'll need to find it. And if I can find it whenever I put this up on the actual YouTube page, I'll put a link to the actual article so you can read it and see the pictures. But there are places in the country inside of the United States right now where they are building cars at such a rate without being able to put the actual chips in them to operate them, that you're seeing these cars parked in massive parking lots just awaiting basically the computer processing unit, the central processing unit for the car.
Wow.
And everybody forgets, like, it's not just your infotainment center that needs a CPU, guys. That is one thing. But there's also the outside of just the infotainment side of things, There's also a need for things in the realm of, we also need to have CPUs that actually run the ECU, engine control unit. There's an actual processor that's running your engine and telling it when to fire each cylinder. So you have that. You have, control units that control in a car that will control a transmission as well. And electric cars have, processors and controllers that control all the voltages and make sure everything's output properly to all the motors.
Cameras.
Everything requires some kind of processor. Shocking. I mean, even and coming from the utility industry, oil and gas and energy industry, you computers and stuff, when you replace and put and upgrade, new pumps, new motors, new monitoring systems for those kind of things. You've also got the processors that are tied to relay systems as to overage protection, drill rigs. Heck, cranes have computers in them. One of the things people don't really think about is cranes have a computer in them that tells them when they're overloaded. So I mean, there's so much to it, to the CPU and the silicon supply right now, that I think a lot of people tend to forget. Now, is crypto affecting things? I'm sure there's a small effect there, at least a little one. Maybe not a huge one, but at least a little one. Um,
But
but
the whole world runs on computers. Whole
it
thing.
does.
And
Yeah, I mean,
so I don't have a processor on me. I don't have a spare processor. But so the die, the actual physical, like, core, I'll call it, is actually quite small. You can probably fit it in the little indent on this drive. Yeah, there's a GPU. Though I can't. Nope. Yeah,
just
nice.
like me when I do it.
Yeah. So underneath that big silver heatsink, which is what it is, there's a little die, and the die you can probably fit on on your nail, on your fingernail. The rest of it is substrate. So that's basically the glue that's gonna hold everything together. So I, probably say that more than
I
half of the GPU assembly is substrate.
was trying to show you this a second ago. If you see where my finger is, that's a
Yeah,
little chip right there. And
yeah,
then there's
yeah.
that green die space, that green space around that little chip that my finger just touched. That's the substrate, guys. That's what's underneath the heat sinks that he was pointing out here. You got substrate that goes with that actual die, and it's got. I mean, I can't get it up to the screen where you can see it probably, but it's got millions of little copper lines running it,
And
little itty bitty connections that have to be, and then nodes on the bottom that have to be connected onto the board. And while the board can be a lot of different materials, some of the board is substrate. So if you got a shortage of substrate,
you can't
a
build the
shortage
board.
of all of this, that kind of makes a big difference. Um, I think a great example that you were kind of bringing up though is that there's so much to them, and it's kind of shocking to think about it. Like, professional parts don't really seem to be affected that much. Um, yes, they are affected. Like, you're not going to go out and say, "Hey, I want like a Quadro RTX 6000. I want that right now." You're not. You're going to pay a premium for it right now, but they're in a much higher supply because they already cost more to begin with
Right.
than a RTX, using that Quadro RTX 6000, than like a 2080 Ti. They already cost more, a substantial amount more than a 2080 Ti.
Right.
And rolling forward to the A6000, you got the A6000 that costs, it's a, lack of a better word, it's roughly a $5,000 card right now if you can find it. When you find it, you can find it, but when you find it, it's like a $5,000 card. Way to go, knock it down. Um, but so you got an RTX 6000 A6000, and it's a $5,000 card. The 3090, which is pretty close, but not quite the same. It's $1,500. It well it we'll go to what you can find them, like if you found like a new one on Newegg right now. It's about 19 to $2,000. All right. If I am a person building a machine for myself, like you or me, Chris, if I'm like you or I, and I'm building a machine for myself, I'm not going to go and buy A5000 or A6000 unless I just have a need for it and I can justify the purchase.
Right.
But it's a little bit easier to swallow the pill and say, you know what, I'll get that 3090. Yeah, if I could find that at MSRP, or MSRP is a myth, but if I could find that at a reasonable stock price, yeah, I'd buy that. But I'm not, because it's going to give me similar performance levels in a lot of situations. Now, to Chris's point earlier about what makes a workstation difference and the reliability factor, 3090s are not tested near as much as an A6000. So an A6000 is going to last substantially longer and be available to be run constantly for a much longer period of time. It can sustain higher thermal loads for a longer period of time. It back to the whole crypto conversation. People always talk about, well, you don't want to get a used crypto card sometimes because you get heat, because the heat on the CPU itself will sometimes degrade the processor. And a lot of times the thing that is degrading is the thermal paste, or something about the cooler. So if you decided to buy it and replace the cooler with a new water cooler or something like that, you're probably fine. But even still, they're not going, the people that are buying them for crypto, they're not going to sell them anytime soon, because right now it's an upward trend. And as long as it's an upward trend, I don't think you're going to see anybody that just wants to up and get rid of a high end card, especially. And if they do, they're getting, you know, sometimes double the price they bought them for.
Or or
Which,
more.
yeah, which is crazy. Which then puts you in the realm of, okay, I was gonna buy a 3090 for $2,000, but if I look for it on eBay, the average price is running around 3,800, 3,900.
That
What the heck? I'm gonna spend 20% more, or
y
25% more, and just get an A6000. And I do think we need to clarify this. So a gaming rig can do work, and also a workstation can game, albeit
yes.
you might see some lower performance numbers, right?
Yes.
So I mean, all right. So I love this because Chris has actually built an A6000 rig. I have an
Which
A6000
is
myself,
what's behind me.
but yeah. But what I was going to say about yours is, you guys got the chance to like test it out and see how it was, running in that situation. It was performing pretty well with things.
Yeah.
I mean, if you wanted to run a game on it, there's nothing that said you couldn't do it.
Yeah.
Actually, I'm going to pull the specs side by side. So NVIDIA.
It's probably gonna run a little bit louder than a 3090 because it's a blower card. Um,
Yep.
but it's better for multi GPU
Hey,
because it's a blower
the
card.
3090 is a hybrid blower now.
Yeah, so yeah, they oh, yes. Yes. Nvidia has the weird fan thing going on, which
To a degree. But what I've heard about now, I've not gotten to test or use a 3090. I'd love to find one
we
and get
have
one just for
testing
play.
we have a testing database I can pull up. I believe
Do it.
we should have recorded the 3090. So I don't he didn't record the benchmark, but uh there was some test and it was getting 1700 megahertz and it was at 65 degrees. And that's a 3090 Founders Edition. The 3070 a one made by MSI in Furmark, no less, was getting 1850 megahertz and 60 degrees in Furmark.
Wow.
Furmark is going to kill most things. It's because it's built to. But yeah, the and so The A6000 in Furmark was at 1560, which is lower, but we also weren't overclocking it, and it was at 82 degrees, which is well within the spec. I think thermal throttle on that is like uh
If it's 93.
yeah, yeah. So it was well within spec. Octane render, it was at 82 degrees, so same speed. Actually, the speed went up from 1560 to 1830, and then in superposition, which is just a gaming benchmark, it was at 1890 and 80 degrees. So even better, but it's
So
superposition. So
I, I don't want to find something that's OC'd. I want to find the stock clocks on one. It's why they have so they have, and that's one thing that you find about a lot of GPU manufacturers that are making so basically that, and that's the other thing, and people tend to not know, at least, or they might not have known. A 3090 is manufactured, the chip is what NVIDIA manufactures and sends that to board partners. They do make a reference board and they can send them a reference board to make it on, but you can get a wild variation of how something is built
mhm,
for a 3090,
mhm,
whereas a solid, A6000 is going to be basically completely manufactured by NVIDIA and then sent to the board partner to basically slap their logo on and send it out.
mhm.
They may do additional testing, but for lack of a better word, that's the way it's going to go.
And so every Quadro or A RTX A, whatever,
Yeah,
is going to be within 1%, probably one tops 5% because it's made by the same company. Um, so it's not like going between ASUS or EVGA or Gigabyte or MSI, who can change the fans and all the things that go into the card.
yeah. I mean, it's very different to think about and see. So where is? I want to go actually look at. I can do this. GPU Z. I should be able to see it this way. So I want to go and look at, where are they? Where's that thing I was going to see? There's a great little comparison tool sometimes. Uh, hmm, Sometimes this will show me, but no, that's not what I want. But for instance, and that's the other thing people tend to forget too. So an A6000, it has different core clocks too, guys. It's a little bit. It has a little bit more. That's what I wanted. Um, but it does have the full 102 die. Um, so you've got that opportunity to use all of the tensor cores, and so it does have a little bit more performance. I mean, it's not a lot. So to give you the spec on the stock ones, a base clock for a 3090 is effectively 1400 megahertz with a 1700 megahertz boost on the core clock. An A6000 has a base clock of 1450 and 1860 for the boost. So you're actually getting a faster
Boost clock.
uh, base and boost on a bigger core load. And that's why if you look at like relative performance based on the pure numbers, an A6000 is about 11% faster than a 3090. Now, there's other factors that people tend to forget. So 3090 has faster memory. And in gaming, memory clock speeds make a lot of difference. But, you know, a 3090 has the same effective bandwidth as a 3080 in terms of its memory bandwidth.
So if
A
we
3090 is a little faster.
we can
3090 has a 936.2 gigabyte per second bandwidth on its on its processor a 30 A6768 gigabit per second. However, if you drop down in the 3090 and check out the 3080, which just like anything else is ungodly expensive, it's got a 760 gigabyte per second bandwidth. So it's actually slower than the A6000 in memory bandwidth. Because and the primary reason for that is it has a 320-bit bus. So that's why.
If we look at if we look at Octane Bench, which is a Octane is a visual effects rendering engine, and Octane Bench is the benchmarking tool for Octane. Yeah, and that big power draw. The 3090 pulls a score of 655, and the A6000 pulls 628. So the 3090 is about 4% above the A6000, which is probably due to the faster memory. But you can really only, unless you do custom water cooling, you can really only put probably 2 of them in a build, because of the way that they're cooled. Gigabyte and I think Asus had one as well, had a blower model of a 3090 that was only available for like a month, maybe that, and now it's totally off their sites. But the A6000 is still available.
I was going to say it wasn't effective. I mean,
Right,
and once again, getting back to what makes a workstation unique, it's how reliable is it?
right.
And we get back to talking about Xeons versus and Threadripper Pros, and you talk about Epic chips as well.
Mhm,
The thing about workstation parts and components is that they're usually better bend too. So they're usually the best of the best. So they are more efficient. So they actually use one, they'll end up using less power, and two, they'll end up being cooler to operate under normal load conditions. So it is what it is. Right now, what can you buy though? I mean, it's comical when you think about it. Unless you're buying workstation level components, it's really hard to build a rig. Threadripper and you know Xeon or HEDT from Intel are still somewhat widely available wherever you go to look for it. Um, and if you go to a system builder, sometimes you can find it. But if you're the average user like myself or someone else, you build a computer, or you buy a computer with the intentions of it lasting you several years. Um, Most people that build a workstation, the upgrade, Intel has the thought process, the upgrade cycle is every 2 years, like Apple. It's not, but most companies are upgrade on a 5-year rolling schedule. A lot's changed in 5 years, one,
mhm,
but also in that 5 years, your components have to be able to last that long.
mhm.
And if you're overclocking the mess out of something without proper cooling, you're probably not going to make it out alive. You might make it 2 or 3 years, but if you're running a Threadripper Pro or a Threadripper chip, and you're overclocking it and pushing it, and it's running 90 degrees constantly when you're putting it under load, and you're constantly putting it under load, guess what? It's not going to last as long.
Nope.
It just won't. Um, and why does it seem that those professional parts or prosumer parts, if you want to call them, are less effective? It's because less people buy them in general. People buy consumer rigs to game on because in the modern generation, you need one GPU, a decent 8-core plus CPU, and like I
Some
said,
RAM
16 to 32 gigs of RAM, depending on how fast you want to clock them.
and a decent amount of space that hopefully is fast, and
Yeah,
more or less
disk
that's
space.
it.
And that's something I think we all tend to forget about. Everybody is starting to make the move from, either old school, just regular SATA SSDs to NVMe drives, or they're making the upgrade from NVMe, to PCI Express 4.0 NVMe, which is loads faster.
Mhm.
I think what a lot of people tend to forget though when they're building a workstation is, does your application support it?
Does
I mean,
Word
there's
support Gen 4 NVMe?
well,
No.
and does not necessarily does it support it. It'll support it, but does it take advantage of it? I mean, you can build a rig that is, you know, got a Hyper M.2 card or a, gigabytes little Aurora's 4X card, where you can put 4 NVMe drives in it and put them all in RAID 0 and use them at hyper fast speeds. But if your software doesn't use it, what's the point?
Just
And
wasted you just
go
wasted a
ahead.
ton of money.
Yeah, well, and the flip side to it that I think about as well is when you talk about professional parts, is there are professional drives, professional Optane drives, professional NVMe drives from Toshiba and Samsung that aren't just the 980 Pro. That's a prosumer drive. That's still not an actual enterprise drive. But there are professional drives that quite literally can't do anything that special over them other than they have better encryption rates. And if you're a person like me or a person like Chris, you're probably not going to buy something that's going to give you extra encryption if you're not going to run it 24/7. Now, if you are, that's when you want those prosumer drive or those enterprise type drives. But that's not always something you have to have constantly. Um, and I think I debated this earlier internally to myself, really getting deep diving into this, but I'll gloss over it as quickly as possible. And if someone decides to come back, yeah, I see that in chat now. By the way, we say it only draws 300 watts. I have seen A6000 draw more than 300 watts. Not a lot more, but it's far more consistent. Whereas if you get a 3090, that can flow.
I think
Uh,
I think EVGA has a special BIOS for the Win Ultra that allows it to draw very close to 500 watts for one component. You
and
better
there's
have like an 850 watt power supply.
right, and there was also a reason too that uh, there's another reason as well that the power connector was changed. It was so that the way it was pulling water. So basically, if you get an A6000 is the same way. But if you get a new A6000 or a 3090, the 3090 has that AUX kind of 12 pin connector,
Yeah.
and the A6000 has the EPS. It's basically a CPU power connector, 8 pin CPU power connector. I got one laying around here. I'll show you if I can find it real quick. Um, I'll find it here. I'll look for it more in a second. But so the reason they changed those power connectors is so you're basically pulling directly from a 8 pin PCI Express connector when it comes from your power supply. It has the loop. Yes, GeForce does have dynamic boost too, which kind of changes things a little bit. They can boost faster than a 3090, but I can overclock my A6000 faster than most of them do. um, but the power connectors are set up where you have to plug in the direct connection from the power supply, where you used to have like the 2 pins that or the 2 8 pins that came off of one cable, and you could split them. You can't do that with the new connectors because they need that full rail power from both individual lines. Um, I think something else that's kind of cool though is the way everything hooks up and connects and runs. These like the comment suggests, I mean, you're going to get a more balanced load out of an A6000 or an A5000 now too. You're going to have a much more balanced load out to your actual from your actual power supply, where you're probably not going to trip a power supply. um, that I'm not necessarily sure is there's a lot more spikes, I think, in some of the 3090 variants, where you're going to see that it's going to pull a little bit of extra power.
I
Um,
I saw a video a on a channel on YouTube where I think they were doing I think it was a 10900K with a pair of 3090s, and they actually had a 1600-watt power supply because they were trying to protect the system from the random power spikes. You don't need 1600 watts to actually power the system, but the 3090s just
It
completely at random.
yeah. I mean, it's crazy. It is crazy how much power they can pull when they get those custom BIOSes set into them. But back to the great shortage and kind of what's really holding things back. We brought up crypto's kind of holding things down, and it will hold things down for a little while. But everybody's at home right now, or has been at home at least. And depending on where you are in the world, a lot of countries have been kind of handing out a little bit of money to people to help stimulate the economy. And whether it be from, people sitting at home and getting unemployment, which is a good thing, they need that, or, stimulus checks going out to people, a lot of extra capital has been pushed into people's hands that they wouldn't have probably had, especially those of us and some of us around that just continue to work, but also, got a stimulus check. Those, people like that, that's money that they weren't counting on. And the design goal of it was to stimulate the economy. And it did. And a lot of people bought new computers.
Mhm,
And that's a good thing,
mhm,
but it's also attributed to the supply side of things too, where it's an additional demand that probably wasn't necessarily thought of. And yes, I mean it affected GPU, CPU sales. It affected everybody. I mean the whole stack. Motherboard sales are up. Everything is up.
mhm.
Now you're seeing RAM prices finally starting to trickle back up too. I mean it's as a whole, it's crazy to think that there was a infusion of cash to the everyday American that might not have bought a new PC, but because they're spending more time at home because they can't go out
Mhm.
during this period of time, they spent some money on something that was going to be attractive to them to gain. I'm sure I'd love to see the Twitch numbers of new streamers that they picked up or new users and things like that because that it'd just be interesting to know. And I mean, AMD's got some of the Radeon 6 series cards are hilariously awesome at rasterization. So, you got people that are buying GPUs, they're buying anything that's out there because it's a major lift up over somebody that probably hadn't upgraded their computer or bought a new computer in 10 to 15 years. You know, that's a great comment. While factories had to run at 100% during the pandemic, they were really running 20% under what was 100% because of the new capacity they needed from the demand. That makes a lot. That's a good point to think about. I mean, it's true. When you got an additional supply or an additional demand, and you can only pump out 100%, no one expected it. And hopefully, as we get into the next generations and the new, uh, what do you call it? The new fabs that'll be smaller nodes and whatnot, which will hopefully be more power efficient in a lot of areas. As we get into some of those, smaller nodes and get more efficient, hopefully we'll see a demand, not necessarily a demand drop, but a demand meeting more along with what supply lines can be. The supply comes up, demand comes down a little bit, and we meet in the middle. Hopefully, we don't have an oversupply or a major dip in demand. And if some mining comes down a little bit, that might meet our needs pretty well. I'm kind of hoping, but I don't know that it will because Elon Musk loves to talk about Doge, and you get people that just keep buying cryptocurrencies, and people have to mine for it. But
So
what? Go ahead.
so we were talking about active or new accounts on Twitch, um, you know, year over year. To 2019 total. So this is not new accounts. This is total monthly broadcasters on Twitch. 2019 looks like it was an average of 3,200 a month. 2020 spiked has spiked up to, I'm gonna call it at 7,000. Like it goes from like
There's more people wanting to
it's just
broadcast. More.
and in January of this year it was at 9,800.
Wow.
So January of 2019 was at 4,500. Last January was at 3,900, so it actually dipped by about 500 people. Um, and then this year it's 2,000 more than no, it's like it's triple last time.
Yeah, it's tripled from 2019 is what it sounds like, which is crazy.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's
So all
it's
those
all
people
relative.
and then all those new broadcasters are broadcasting either on a PlayStation or on a PC, possibly on a phone. Um, so that leads to more sales and shortages.
Well, and you bring up something that I really hadn't thought about, bringing into this, but I'll bring into it momentarily. Just think about Xbox and PS4, PS5 sales. Xbox Series X and PS5 sales alone. Like when the PS4 launched, I remember pre-ordering it. You couldn't pre-order these consoles. The pre-orders were gone overnight.
Yeah.
And that goes for any silicon-based parts right now. The pre-orders for stuff go overnight. About the only thing readily available right now is an Intel CPU, a decent variety of motherboards, a third gen, or not third gen, but a Zen 2 based Ryzen 3000 CPU and motherboard combo there. Same thing goes for the Threadripper and workstation cards, and then
Right.
also SSDs to a degree.
And power supplies under 1,000 watts.
That's true. Stuff that's about what you can find. That is that those are the parts you can buy are in that range. Now, if you don't need a workstation, you're kind of, and you're wanting to buy the best of the best brand new stuff, you're probably going to end up buying something from Intel right now as this they were mildly wise back in 2019 when they had their HEDT and 14 nanometer supply issues. They kind of upped the ante and said, we're gonna up the ante here a little bit. We're gonna buy as much substrate as we can. So Intel kind of has rode this wave of having supply, whereas no one else really has from that perspective. But when you think about it, it's like, okay, so Intel stuff's available, but it's also not really the best in some situations. Now, as we get into this in future conversations more and more, you're going to find Intel still has a lead in certain aspects of workstation work, mainly because while we had to deal with Bulldozer and such like that from AMD, in those days of super thermal CPUs from AMD, uh, nuclear grades, what I like to call it, from AMD. Intel just kind of worked with its partner, worked with all the software partners, and optimized their codecs and their internal processes to make things a little bit easier on those things. Now, AMD has caught up quickly.
Mhm.
Um, and we can talk about some of the differences there. And in future episodes of this, I guarantee you we'll have some deep dives into why things like AVX 512 matter, because from a professional workload, AVX 512 has been integrated into a lot of software, and it makes a very big difference from a processing standpoint of view. But we'll leave that for another day, because we're talking and focusing on that workstations and what you can find and what you can use right now. There is the factor of budget. And a lot of people tend to say, okay, I want to build a workstation. I want to build something that I can work on and game on. And I want it to be good for, everybody's comment is, I want it to be good for 3 to 5 years, don't have to worry about it. Budgeting for a workstation is almost always going to require you to spend a little more than what you initially had thought of.
Yep.
I would almost always say whatever you were going to spend on a gaming PC, double it. So if you're going to spend $1,000 on a gaming PC and you want a workstation variant of that gaming PC, go to $2,000. And that's a fair assumption. I mean, you'll get most everything you want out of it. And why is that the case? Because workstation parts are more expensive. You're gonna, if you want ECC RAM, you're gonna have a price markup. If you want,
A pro card.
yeah, if you want a Quadro, you're gonna have to pay a little extra for or a RTX A, an enterprise, however you want to call it. Gosh, that is the sad thing that I
That's gonna be
miss.
hard.
If you want those things, you're gonna have to upgrade and spend a little more on them. Now, it shouldn't overall affect your budget in the long run, but it's also a good reason to do it because if you are making a workstation expense and you're going to work on this, you can capitalize that. You can depreciate the value of it over the 5 years that you're going to use that, and that's a tax write-off. So you actually get some of that money extra money you spent back. And a lot of people don't necessarily recognize that from a tax perspective because it is a for work piece. And as long as when you're working, you're using it. If you game on it at night, who cares? And some of the things that's kind of cool, modern technology has changed so much. I'm really waiting to see what we get out of AMD from their DLSS competitor. I'm really hoping that comes to term. But I mean, NVIDIA broadcast and some of the background noise suppression features that a lot of companies are coming out with, it's going to be great.
Which is what we are using heavily right this minute. NVIDIA Broadcast in particular, and Teams.
Oh, okay. So I'm gonna do the demo. I'm gonna be the one that does the demo. So I have a overclocked 10980XE rig with a Quadro RTX 6000 and a NVIDIA RTX A6000 in there. All right, gets hot because it gets hot a long time ago, and it is what it is. I decided I wanted to do something different, so I put a little portable air conditioning unit in my office with me. So I'm going to go here and I'm going to go to my device settings. I'm going to turn off noise suppression, and you're going to hear the difference. And it is a difference. It is crazy how much noise suppression can remove from the sound. I mean, fans, all that stuff, just it pulls it right out. Turn it back on so you can hear the difference again. But all that comes at a cost too, guys. Keep in mind, noise suppression, all those features, if you're streaming online, that's coming off your GPU. The AI tensor cores and things like that they're using, you're going to get some use percentage out of your GPU doing that. Now, is it going to affect you all that much? Probably not. Probably not that big a deal. But you will see it.
I think
Um,
I think on an
Go ahead.
A6000 you were seeing like highs of like 18% load from NVIDIA Broadcast.
Yeah,
And
I was seeing the standard when you turn on noise suppression. The standard that I end up seeing is something about 10 to 15%
hmm,
on the GPU. Um,
and so
sometimes it's a little more, sometimes it's a little less, depending on how quiet the room is. But yeah, I mean, it's still a draw, guys. It is still a draw.
so for reference, I'm running a 2080 Super, which is still not a bad card.
Not at all.
My GPU is NVIDIA Broadcast is pulling 9%, probably maxing at 14%, but so very, very close to what Brad has. And the A4000, which should be shipping very soon, I think in June. That should be a little bit better than what I have, better or lower, because it's a newer, more powerful card that has more uh, AI cores. We're just gonna call them AI cores. That's not what they're actually called. We're just gonna call them that because I wanted to. So it's not gonna be like the AI tools are gonna be pulling like half your video card. Um, but it's something to take into account.
It is customized for it though. I mean, they're like you said, they're not going to pull all of it, but it will pull a decent amount. A decent amount. Um, since loads seem similar to the cards, it I don't, that's a good question. It's kind of interesting to think about. Also, I wanted to laugh at it and say that your 2080 Ti is worth more than probably worth more than a actual 3090s MSRP right now, Chris.
Let's
Just
see,
so you know, if you wanted to
what can I
make the
buy?
upgrade by finding it,
2080
I pulled it up on
Super
eBay.
Strix.
Oh, that's the Ti. Sorry, I did the Ti, not the Super.
Strix 2080 Super. Amazon? Now let's try Amazon. Buying
eBay
options.
has the Ti. Let me see what the actual.
Oh, so used as low as $2,000. I did not pay $2,000 for this card. As high new 3,900.
So pre-owned, I think
Used
what
very
when the
good.
wasn't the 2080 Super like a $700 card?
Yeah, that's about what I paid for mine.
Yeah, pre-owned on eBay, 2080 Super, $1,000, and that's at the bottom of the barrel. I mean, I bottom of the barrel kind of makes me question, well, why it's bottom of the barrel. Are they just unloading it because they got a new card or what? But that's an expensive setup, and yeah, the comical thing to me, when you think about the lovely piece of information we have over here on, wow, 3060 Ti's like
On
1500
chat.
on eBay.
Chat
Yeah,
is
I'm looking.
chat
I'm
is
looking
lighting
over at
up.
the chat back. I'm getting a chat back on here.
Chat is
The
lighting up.
Yeah, it's just this the short. The Quadros is definitely a way to go. You can actually find them from a lot of vendors, comically, for at or very close to MSRP.
I'm consistently
Um,
seeing RTX 4000s for about 12 to 1300, which is not terrible.
it's $300 to $400 more than what they went for stock, but that's actually I mean, you can justify that for a card right now. You can't justify a
A
20,
4X.
yeah, 4x price of what it's going for, and they still work just as good for what you're doing. Um, it's so crazy. And so one of the other things that we kind of thought about and we were talking about when we were kind of planning this out is like, so video support, the changes that people are making to utilize, so video support being, camera background images. Also, you have video rendering that's getting better and better on multi GPU support. Modern CAD cracks me up too. The way things with CAD's working. My favorite example has to be this one, and I've got to test 2020 on my theory, or 2022 on my theory. But so I have my primary rig's a 10980XE. It's mildly overclocked. I mean, on a water loop, but that's why it's mildly overclocked. And I put it up against a Threadripper 3970X, and I was just doing some testing to try to see what was better. And 3970X has 32 cores and 64 threads. Good bit of processing horsepower right there.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then so I was like, okay, this is kind of cool. And then I was like, all right, so let's just do which Autodesk Inventor, which is the primary software I use, does a lot of its image and early video rendering on the CPU still. So it ramps the core up to 100% and just runs with it. And the Inventor rig, which 2 minutes is 2 minutes, was about 2 minutes slower than the 3970X. The Intel rig was. And you say, okay, well, yeah, you would expect it to be 2 minutes slower. It took the 3970X 40 minutes to render the frame, and it took the Intel part 42 minutes. I
So
plus or
that's
minus a couple seconds on that, but
so not really big
like,
difference.
That's not, I mean, that's margin of error almost sometimes. It's like, how is that possible? And you just have to sit back and go, this doesn't make any sense. And we talk about some other things. I'm a specialist in reality capture, laser scan processing. I understand how it works and what makes it work the best. And I still see physical processing, like when it's going in and doing all the algorithms and such like that. Yeah, more cores the better. But the actual registration work, where you're loading in and out of RAM and moving stuff around in RAM, all the gains you make by having more cores on a 3970X, something about the memory controllers with AMD still have me asking questions. And I constantly go back and test it when they release new software variants, because it just, you would think 32 cores should be faster, but it's not overall. And I'm like, how is this possible? So, I mean, you have that's one of the reasons that we're here, is to answer some of those kind of questions for you guys. I mean, yes, we are calling this podcast "Don't Call Me for IT Support." That is going to be the running title for it. We'll have, subtitles that go with that, but the actual podcast is going to be "Don't Call Me for IT Support," because you don't want to ask us networking questions and stuff like that. But if you've got, questions that you want to get into, or topics you want to delve into on workstations, oh man, this is, you found the right guys. We're here to talk about that kind of stuff.
We can talk about
Uh,
RTX-A all
oh
day.
God,
I
I'll talk
got it.
about that all day
Finally
for
got it.
sure.
RTX-A.
RTXA, yeah, I miss Quadro. I'm still, I get
Bring
it,
it back.
unifying things, but it's a, and I've talked to guys at NVIDIA. They're like, yeah, I don't know why we made that change. It was something that they wanted to make towards the top. And I get that. That's cool. It's branding. It's how you brand things.
Yeah.
Nobody really, Quadro was one of those things where, and, you know, it's funny. We talk about, I just mentioned CAD and stuff like that. But when you really start to understand where Quadros or RTXA Enterprise, whatever you want to say, where they shine, it's not in the standard, okay, I'm going to create a little quick solid model.
No.
I'm not going to do that.
You can do that with more or less anything.
Yeah. Miners are screwing things up as well as scalpers, but it's bigger than that. Yeah, well, so we kind of talked about that a little bit earlier too.
Yeah.
So mining is not really the full Monty. It's a big part of it, and it is contributing to it.
Hmm.
And if mining went off, we might see a supply normalization. Not like completely dropped off, but if mining went down or something changed and it made it less profitable, whatever, you might see somewhat of a supply normalization. But the problem is demand, guys, not just from miners, but you've got people that, like we said earlier, that the pandemic sent them home. They couldn't do anything. So, and then governments around the world said, you know what, we're going to give you free money because we told you you had to go home. And so they did that. And so all of a sudden, these people are buying things because they have to sit at home, because you couldn't go outside. They didn't want you to see anybody. Going to the beach was a bad thing,
The,
for a while there. And
the,
so when you have all those negatives and forceful keep you at home, you end up with issues where you're like, all right, I'm gonna buy a PS5. I'm gonna spend $1,000 and buy a PS5.
I read it. I read an article like a month ago. I can't remember, but it was going over. I wish I could find it because it would totally be great to put in chat. But it was going
Would.
over all the things that all of the events that most people don't think about, that over time m- put us where we are now, like Intel getting stuck trying to fab 10 nanometer, and so then people started buying Ryzen, and then
Yeah.
which made the fabs go and spin hot, and then the pandemic happened, and so then people weren't So it's not just a single event. It's a lot of things built up over time that crunched um the the global supply chain and a couple of core factories that more or less make all the chips in the world. And you can only fab it so much like at a time, like,
Correct.
and it takes years to build a new fab.
That's correct. Well, I'm gonna do two things first. So this GPU is a GeForce GTX 295. It's the oldest card that I still own.
That's
I took it apart just to show people what it looks like. It's kind of like one of those showpieces now to me. Yes, it only has a single SLI finger because the two processors on board are already SLI'd together.
that's one of them. Wow.
Yep. So you could do quad SLI with two 295s. Um,
And have a
and
1,000-watt power draw.
actually, I think I remember only having a 750 watt with that card. It's only got a 8 pin and a 6 pin on it.
Well, yeah, I was talking about 2 of those cards would be 1,000 watt.
Maybe I thought that was like 280 for a card. But yeah, you'd still need a 1,000 watt power supply for that kind of setup. I agree.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, no, but there was a question back in chat. What's an AVX workload?
Oh,
Reality capture uses a lot of AVX workloads.
yeah, that was that
Go
was
ahead.
the comparison between the 10980 and the 3970. They were
Yep.
wondering if that test was AVX.
So I'm almost positive that it is because it's a wide. So it's a vectorization. So it tends to go with ray tracing and also shadows and lighting a lot. Um, it's just as an instruction set for x86 that Intel developed and pushed in Skylake. So it was also available in Xeon Phi.
I was gonna ask if it was in Phi.
Yep, it's in.
Okay.
Wait for it. Wait for it. Show off the toy time. Oh, my foot freak. Roll back.
Oh, Brad's gone. Oh no.
Brad's back.
Ooh, you have a Phi.
I have two Xeon Phi coprocessors. There's a lot of little things on the back of that sucker. Kind of hard to see. Yeah. And
That's
the one
cool.
thing that sucks about it is it's passively cooled. So you had to
Oh
come up with a
god.
solution to cool it.
Oh no. It's good. That's good for racks, not so good for a desktop. And they probably don't make water blocks for it.
No. I was able to get it working on my 10 with my 10980XE though, for those that wonder.
Mm.
I got it to work.
Hmm.
I don't think there's anything else behind me I want to show off. No, but yeah, so AVX 512 has a lot going into it. It's just it's being a much wider vector that you can use. That's what makes it beneficial. It has nothing to do with anything like companies, and it gets back to that whole why does Intel sometimes better in certain workloads still? It's because they develop these extensions directly for a lot of industries so that those industries could take advantage of less cores and have Intel's mindset always was 4 cores and 8 threads for the consumer is more than enough. We'll increase and get up to 20 cores or something like that with Xeon as we go, but you really don't need that many more cores if we can optimize the workload on those cores. And eventually, because if you wanted more cores or extensions that ran parallel processed, you would go out to something like a Xeon Phi or to a GPU and use GPU compute for the more many core needed tasks.
Yep.
That was what Intel was pushing. And then, in 2017, all of a
Zen
sudden,
launched.
Ryzen showed up on the game, and the chiplet market started, blowing things up. And it has changed. It has fundamentally changed the way Intel and all other manufacturers are creating their processors. It's fundamental. But it's one of the things that AMD has not been able to integrate into their processors yet, and it's kind of a little bit of a holdback. It's preventing them from being able to take it full advantage of all the extra cores. And I don't know how they'll, AVX2 is done on a single core basis. AVX 512 is done across processor.
Mm.
So it's multi-core integrated into the entire processing set, not into a specific core. So what may end up happening, and I don't know this, don't quote me, I'm just basing this on my understanding of the architecture and the instruction set. It may be something where you end up with the chiplet design, individual AVX 512 blocks on each chiplet, which in theory would mean you could run an AVX 512 workload while also doing something else, which
Mm-hmm.
could be huge.
There was an
Yeah,
article saying,
the last I heard talking to AMD
yeah,
was that it would probably be next generation or something like that.
so like
And
Genoa.
I don't know the code name. I mean, when I talk to AMD, I'm not trying to talk to them because I want to know exactly, all the secrets and all the, things that leakers are looking for. I just want to know things that are going to make my processing workload better. And so that's been a running question since Zen 2 for me with AMD. Is are we going to see, Zen 3, Zen 2, Zen 4, Zen 5, whatever in the roadmap, in the publicly known roadmap, are we going to see something where AVX 512 is integrated? And the last I had heard was the complication was the IO die. So whenever there's going to be an IO die change, whether that's rumors circulating out there, things that I'm trying to stay away from anyways, but rumors circulating out there that it might be there might be a Zen 3 Plus, or there might be or we might skip that and go to straight to Zen 4. I mean, okay, if that's when we get a new IO die, that's probably when they get AVX 512. I'm not saying,
Possibly.
like, I don't know. I don't know the exact answer. I just know it's not on Zen 3. They only have AVX2 on Zen 3. And it does accelerate reality capture processing, the actual processing, a good bit. My biggest thing, and I'll say this, talking about processors right now, and just reading into the chat of it all. My big thing looking into it is you've got Threadripper that's still on Zen 2, essentially,
Mm.
and you don't have a Threadripper that's on Zen 3. Now, I'm trying to read between the lines right now, but if I'm AMD and I'm already struggling to make all the parts that I'm making,
Wait
I
on
don't
Zen
I
3
don't I
Threadripper.
don't know that we're going to see a Zen 3 Threadripper or Threadripper Pro for that matter. Which, here's the comical fact to that just kind of makes me laugh when I think about that. If we don't, hypothetical theories right now, totally off basis. If we don't see a Zen 3 Threadripper, we're going to have to move because we're going to be migrating with Zen 4, from what I understand, in everything I've read. And like I said, I can ask the questions all day long. The AMD rep's going to tell me, can't talk about that. Don't really know. We don't really know what it's going to. I read articles too, guys, just like you. If Zen 4 is PCI 5 based, PCI Express 5 based, and DDR5 based, that means that Threadripper, Zen 2 Threadripper, moving to Zen 4 Threadripper, will have to have a new motherboard.
Yep. Yep.
Same thing will probably be going on, the same thing for Threadripper Pro. That would mean that while AMD did an excellent job giving us 4 to 5 generations essentially of AM4, they've only given us 1 generation of HEDT
per model.
per
Yeah, yeah,
model. The
yeah.
only reason that the Zen Plus model stuck around and got an upgrade, the only reason for that was purely it was the Zen Plus model, guys. It was the same exact design as the original. You know, there wasn't anything different between the IO die and so on and so forth. I would imagine if we go to Zen 4 and we get a new IO die, you're going to have a new chipset. And mind-boggling internally, you know, maybe some people are seeing some internal going on like me, but like Intel for the first time in their life had HEDT last 3 generations, almost 4 technically, almost 4. 4. It is technically 4 if you count the fact that it was 7, 9, and 10, and they just didn't have an 8th gen. But
Yep.
that's not usual to get 4 generations on Intel for anything. And X299 has been around since 2017.
Meanwhile, on the core side, we've had
Every other year
every
you get a TikToker, which is uh
every
come on, Intel.
Z,
Find a happy balance. Let's do 3 apiece. Come on,
Z what?
Intel. Give me 3 apiece. Split the workload there. I get it. The ASUSes of the world, the EVGAs of the world, the MSIs of the world, they want to release a new motherboard. That's how they make money. Is every
Yeah,
year they need a new motherboard out.
yeah.
And so that's why you always see a new chipset and usually compatibility back 1 generation with Intel. Intel does that every other generation and forces you to move to the next generation for 2 reasons. One, there's usually some better optimization they have in their pinout. That's why you saw 55, then 1200 now, and I think the next one's 1600.
1700, I think.
You know,
But
love to get a show of hands. I wish there's like 9,000 people to get a poll, but
oh, you can
you
poll
know,
in Twitch chat.
well, what I was going to say though is, how many people remember that prior to socket 2011, the HEDT socket was 1366.
Yeah. Wow,
So
that's
the pinout on the next gen Alder Lake boards is going to be 1600. It's the pinout on next gen Alder Lake is going to make next gen Alder Lake more powerful by a manner of margin from 1366, which is a Broadwell.
no
Probably the same.
Broadwell was 2011, so 1366 was, oh gosh. Um
Oh, Sandy Bridge was Broadwell. That's right.
Ivy
Sandy Bridge was
Bridge. It was Ivy, I think it was
Ivy
Ivy
Bridge was
Bridge.
after Sandy Bridge.
Yes.
Sandy Bridge was 2011. Then you had 2011 3. That was it was Haswell. Let
But
me go look.
Haswell was core. It wasn't HATT. I think. No, I think they made a Haswell E. Oh my god. This is like this is like 2013 gen. I'm
All right,
forgetting this is a long time
back up.
ago.
It was a long time ago, but I mean, it's. Oh, take the few moments, take the little deep dive with us.
Go
So
down,
4X series, go at I think it's the 30.
gonna go down memory lane with Intel.
And that's what we're doing. Um, so it is before the 3970, which was Sandy Bridge. So whatever was before Sandy Bridge.
Oh god. Yorkfield?
We're going to legacy core processors here, guys.
Was it? It wasn't Nahum or however
That
it's.
sounds. I think Nehalem might have been it. Hang on, let me see this. That's 8750K. I don't have the legacy X processors though. Oh, 99. There we go. Here we go.
It was Core 2 Quad was
So
before.
Gulftown would have been one of them.
Yep.
That's that one. And then
That was the
what
Core 2.
about 2000 series?
See you, man.
No, wasn't that one. You got to go way, way, way back in the processor stack. Let me do it this way. Launch date. Sort it by the launch date. Go the other way. All right. No, it wasn't 3000 series. It would have been the 2000 series. If 2000 series is Sandy Bridge, then it would have been Gulf Town. Let's see. The max cores were 6. Looks like it was only do it by core count. That might solve my problem even better. See, Gulf Town, which is Q1 2011 was the last one there. All right, let me go look at WIKI. We get you going back down in the processor stack because that's how we're going to do it now. So I want to go Skylake. And then Broadwell, it would not be Broadwell. And then
There was a Broadwell EP. I can't remember what it was.
Haswell came before Broadwell.
Yep.
On 22 nanometer. Broadwell was the first 14 nanometer, by the way. Was it? Yep, Broadwell and holy crap, Broadwell was 14 nanometer. Guess when Broadwell was released?
20, 2014, 2016, no, 2014 or
2014.
was
Broadwell was released in 2014.
that the 5930K or is that the 4930K? I think the 4930K
I'd have to look. I'll go back
was
to it here in a
Haswell
second.
E.
Sandy Bridge was 32 nanometer.
Wow. Also, I think it's kind of amusing now that so we had an Ivy Bridge chip that was a 3960X. I'm pretty sure that that's right. And we now have a Threadripper that is also a 3960X. But they're vastly different in core count and overall power.
It's gonna blow your mind. Westmere. And it
I
had an
don't
8-core processor. Westmere was the name of it. It's the key. It's an upgrade of Nehalem. It was the node shrink of Nehalem.
and that was right before
2010 was the
Sandy Bridge.
1366 process.
Wow. That was a ride down the rabbit hole.
Yeah, but I know if you really look at some of these things, that's kind of how it happens. You kind of take it down there. The Mage has a 2080, dude. Lucky you. That's awesome. That is awesome. That's a pretty
So
sick run.
I think we're about at the point that we're going to finish up the broadcast. Trying to keep it
Yep.
under the 2 hour mark, and we're getting pretty close to that. Wanted to thank everybody for stopping by our inaugural podcast. Probably gonna do it once or twice a month. Fridays are the go-to day. Follow us on Twitch. If you have the Twitch app, it'll pop up on your phone. We will be uploading the videos to our YouTube channel. I will put a link in chat again because it got buried. Um,
At the very begotten bottom. We didn't, I don't think we thought about that was going to happen either. And also, if you've got questions or something you want us to look at too, guys, feel free to send us an email. Um,
I don't think that
we
the
are not
email
your
got.
typical guys, not your typical IT guys, but and I'll do that again too. So it's
I'm not sure if it's gonna go through. If Twitch is gonna let it go through. Alternately, if you are connected with either Brad or I are on LinkedIn, you can shoot us a message on there. Um, yeah,
it might it might
it's just IT guys at star star star. So
well,
yeah,
it's IT guys at notyourtypicalitguys.com. Can't read it. That's it. It is what it is. But yeah, we'll put I'll put a link to the email on the YouTube page too. We're gonna modify that up some this weekend, get it rocking and rolling. But yeah, feel free, guys. It's been a pleasure talking to you. We do have a section that we will start covering in the next sessions that's just IT support. So, like I said, if you got questions or something, you want to know something about a certain processor, and if we get enough interest, we might start doing some like massive Teams meetings with people and letting everybody come in and have a conversation with us and recording that and making that part of the live stream later. So we'll uh we'll see how it goes. We hope everyone has a good evening. But Chris, take us out.
thanks everybody.
Bye.